In today's episode, that'll cost you not one single thing out. Shut the store down to cover your ass. You got it, dude. So let's get started. That'll cost you. I was helping my youngest daughter pack up the truck to move over the weekend. We had a good amount of people, so the work went quick. There was close to an hour before they had to leave. There was my daughter, her maternal grandfather driving, and another car following with more things plus her 2 kids. Her grandfather worked with my father in the same mill and once in a while worked together. This was a story he laughed as he told it. Cast, Dad, Roy, the grandfather to my daughter, shop supervisor, general manager. This is as close to how Roy told it, and how I remember what he said. There was a piece of equipment needing fixed. He said what it was, but I have no clue what he was talking about. Just remember this cost close to $300,000 back in the mid-80s. It was the original piece from when the mill opened in 1968, so parts were obsolete and Dad had to make them by hand. Roy said the bearing burnt up and stripped some teeth from the main gear. From what he was saying, Dad not only made the gear by hand, he also made a puller to get the gear off, because that bearing needing replaced was behind it. Dad had gone to get the puller when the shop supervisor came over to talk with Roy. He asked how long the job would be, and was told at least 5 days. 3 days to make or repair the new gear, and another 2 days for tear down and set up. Roy said Dad might be able to fix this one, and if that was the case, 3 days maximum. The shop super asked why Roy was just sitting there and not taking the gear off. He explained where Dad had gone and what he was getting, and he would be back in a minute or two. This was not good enough for the shop supervisor, and he grabbed a sledgehammer and said, "If you just tap it with this, it should come loose enough to just pull with your hand." Dad had just stepping into the room and hollered for the shop supervisor to stop before he breaks something. I guess he looked right at Dad and smacked the gear. I have no idea what it was made of, but he hit it in just the right spot to break the gear into a couple of pieces. Needless to say, Dad and Roy were upset. They walked into the office of the general manager and told him what just happened, and instead of the 3 days they could have had it done in, it will now take the 5 or so days. He was pissed. First, the shop supervisor is not to touch any tool unless passing it to the person using it, and another is he is not to try any repairs himself under any circumstance. The next day when Dad and Roy got to the machine, there was a gear sitting there. The shop supervisor came over and said he had it flown in from somewhere in the States, and it cost $20,000 because it was air expressed. Dad tried telling him that is the wrong gear, and he will just build one he knows will work. Shop supervisor told him to use the gear he bought because he wasn't going to waste that much company money without using what he bought. Here is the MC. Dad and Roy got the bearing changed and were done getting the gear into place. It was made from a different material and a few other major differences. When they were all done, they called over the shop supervisor and the general manager to show how the machine is fixed. Roy and Dad gave the shop supervisor the honor of starting it up and show how well it's working. With a big smile, he started it up. It ran well for about the first 5 minutes of the 15-minute test run when it started making odd noises. Before the shop supervisor could hit the emergency stop button, there was a loud bang and lots of screeching metal. Dad and Roy took the covering off and saw that not only the gear was destroyed, but it was in tiny little pieces all through the machine. The main rod where the bearing got replaced had broken in a couple of places. It would cost the company more money to buy the parts and fix this one than it would be to order one from Japan. Within 6 weeks, the Japanese workers brought the new machine, but had set it up and calibrated. This cost the mill just under $3 million, where it would have cost under $50,000 if Dad and Roy were left to fix it. Since the shop supervisor wasn't part of the union, was fired on the spot. When the mill fired him and wouldn't even let him on the property, he had to wait for security to bring everything from his office. Roy said the shop supervisor wasn't made to pay back any money for his major mess up, but his name was blacklisted in the industry. He moved away within a month, and as far as Roy knew, no one had heard from him since. Dad and Roy didn't get any real bonus for the job, but there was a little extra on their paycheck the next week. Roy said he can't remember how much, but it wasn't a huge amount, but it made a difference. I love hearing stories about my dad about work. He always had a warped sense of humor, so any MC by him was usually a doozy. But it wasn't just at work. Anywhere was not safe from him. Too bad he isn't here to tell me more stories, but I have memories of some, and I hear more from people he was friends with or worked with. I hope you enjoy reading them as much as I loved hearing them. Not one single thing out. I did a work-study job for the chemistry/biology department in college. Most of the professors were pretty nice, but I had this one that was a huge douchebag. He insisted that not one thing in the lab be out of place when he started his lecture, and would throw a huge tantrum if anything had been. The problem was, sometimes there was only 15 minutes between the end of another professor's course and the start of his, so I had to rush around cleaning tables and putting everything in just the right place, and sometimes it just wasn't possible if they had done a big lab project that day. So he would call me out and give me a huge chewing in front of the entire class if one lab tray was still out or the tables hadn't been completely cleaned off. One day he screamed, "I don't want to see one single thing out when I start my lecture." So in a case of malicious compliance, I followed his rules to the letter. He had this huge binder he carried around with all his lecture notes, hundreds and hundreds of pages, all his handwritten notes from his years of teaching. He treated that thing like the Holy Grail, always had it in his hands everywhere he went. So one day at the end of a lecture, he had a staff meeting he had to run to, so he sets his precious binder down on the lecture podium and forgets it. Not one single thing can be left out in the room at the end of a lecture, remember? So I took his precious lecture binder and filed it away in the most obscure out-of-the-way place in the entire lab, basically on the bottom of a pile of other books in the very back corner of an unused portion of the equipment storage room, and stacked a bunch of boxes in front of it for good measure. When he realized it was missing, he went into a complete meltdown. The second I walked in the next day, he ran up and said, "Did you see my binder yesterday?" I said, "Binder? Yeah, I think I saw it when you were giving your lecture yesterday." So technically not a lie. Eventually he did locate it, but it was months later when he had already had to try and recreate many pages of his notes by hand. But I still get a chuckle out of it to this day. Shut the store down to cover your ass. You got it, dude. Okay, another one that is not my MC, but something I witnessed and was affected by. This was back in 2009. I was working in a small town at a Mexican-inspired American fast food restaurant named after a food item and a musical instrument. Decent job, mostly good people. I had been there almost 2 years when this event happened. There is a small cast of characters here. Ursine me, Sarah shift manager, Jane underage coworker, Billy new assistant manager. When our previous assistant manager left, Sarah was convinced she was getting promoted, but instead, they brought in Billy. Sarah was pissed as hell and hated Billy on sight. Now, I didn't think he was all that bad at first, but he quickly revealed one massive glaring flaw. He, a mid-20s male, soon started flirting with and then dating Jane, who was just 16 at the time. Creepy and wrong, and her parents did not like it. So one day, Sarah and myself were working together, doing a 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. closing shift. Around 9 p.m., we got a call from Billy telling us to shut down the store immediately. Naturally, Sarah wanted to know why. Billy just told us to close, and that we were not to let anyone in, no matter what. Of course, this sounded all wrong to us, and Sarah should have refused or at least called the general manager to ask him if we could close up, but technically, Billy did have the authority to shut down the store. So we, as should be obvious, complied. We locked the doors, did all the closing stuff and shut down before 10. Sarah even adjusted my clock out so I got paid for my full schedule. I was off the next 2 days, so I didn't discover the fallout until I came back. It turns out that Billy had taken Jane to a party, which would have been bad enough, but the worst part was that the party was across state lines. And Jane had told her parents that she was working. So, Jane got a message from someone that her parents were going to the store to check up on her, hence, Billy wanting us to close before they got there. Jane's parents forced her to tell them the truth when she got home and contacted our general manager to tell him what happened. Billy got fired and was lucky to not be arrested. Jane was restricted to school, work and home for the rest of the year. And Sarah still did not get promoted to assistant manager. They brought in yet another manager from a different store. Meanwhile, I kept on doing my job. Thanks for watching.